Antonoy. The biting wind was my constant companion, a ghost whispering tales of what I'd lost. The land, a stark canvas of white, stretched to the horizon unbroken save for the dark smear of trees hugging Willow Creek. And me, Jedediah Clark, a lone figure trudging the perimeter of my life. My boots breaking the snow's crust with a quiet finality that echoed the quiet finality of my existence. This wasn't just about checking the fence anymore. It was about marking time, each step a desperate thread holding me upright. I moved slow, deliberate. Waste no motion, waste no words. My face, I knew, was a mask carved from too much vanishing. My beard, gray at the chin, despite my youth, was another sign of the cold that had settled deep within me. The wind tugged at my patched canvas coat, a poor defense against a chill that lived in my bones. Behind me, the house hunched its shoulders, a skeletal reminder of grief. Its chimney breathed thin, fragile smoke, and I imagined Alara inside, a wisp of a girl curled in a rocking chair too vast for her, clutching a worn cloth rabbit. Her cheeks pale but clean, her hair a loose braid, were turned toward the door. Not worry. No, not worry. Just that silent, heartbreaking expectancy of a child who had already learned the cruel patience of sorrow. I came in just before dark, the snow shaking from my coat like a burden shed. No words. Habit not threat, I set my rifle by the door. I nodded to Alara, and she offered a small, tentative smile. I tried to return it, God, I tried. It came out crooked, a spasm of muscle more than any genuine warmth. I lit the lamp, stirred the coals, added a log. The house groaned around us, every creak a memory, every silence a gaping maw. Esther, her absence clung to everything, the worn apron by the pantry, the faint lavender scent in the quilt, the deafening quiet where her voice used to hum. Esther. Gentle, then gone. The blood blooming on the bedsheets after Alara's birth, her hand slipping from mine as the midwife's whispered prayer felt like a judgment. 2 winters had bled into each other since then, marked only by the weather and the endless crushing chores. I spoke little, but my voice never rose. That was my grief, you see. Not anger, but a hollowed-out retreat. I did the work of 2 men, a kind of quiet desperation driving me. Alara, bright-eyed and brave, filled the gaps as best she could. She fed the chickens, swept the corners, spoke to that rag rabbit like it might carry her words to heaven itself. Supper that night was thin stew and cornbread eaten in silence, broken only by the clink of spoons. My eyes kept drifting to the window, though there was nothing to see. Just white. Just dark. Just wind. After I'd tucked Alara into bed and banked the fire low, I found myself at the small desk beneath the front window. My hand, almost without conscious thought, pulled out the bottom drawer. Inside, a folded letter, creased, yellowed. Never sent. Dear Miss, it began in my own clumsy hand. My name is Jedediah Clark. I am a widower with 1 daughter. I live near Willow Creek, 2 miles from town. I seek not a servant nor a saint, just someone kind. Someone who don't mind quiet. I'd written it in the thickest fog of grief one night when the silence had truly screamed. But I never mailed it. Who would want to come here? To this life I held it. Now, read it again, then slid it back into the drawer. No sigh, no sentiment. Just that dull, aching throb in my chest. Outside, the wind howled like something wounded, a lonely beast. It was well past midnight when Boone, my half-deaf hound, let out a short, surprised bark from the barn. My heart, a forgotten drum, thudded against my ribs. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold, a shock. Boots on coat shrugged over my nightshirt, I took the lantern from its hook. The barn, a short walk past the old cottonwoods, loomed. I moved quickly, the lantern casting long dancing shadows on the snow, making the familiar world alien. Boone whined low, circling the barn door. I eased it open, and the warm smell of hay and old wood enveloped me. The lantern's light swept across familiar shapes, tack on hooks, feed sacks, stacked the mare dozing in her stall. And there nestled in the farthest corner a shape that didn't belong. A woman, sleeping, or near enough curled tight beneath an old wool blanket I didn't recognize. Boone was lying beside her, tail twitching in quiet contentment. She stirred as the light found her face. Not startled, but slow, like she was surfacing from a deep, weary dream. Her eyes blinked open. No fear there, just an exhaustion that lived in the very marrow of her bones. I'll go, she whispered before I could even formulate a question. Her voice was raspy from cold, from disuse I didn't know. I stepped forward slowly, lowering the lantern. You know this is my barn, I asked, my voice flat, challenging. She nodded. I didn't mean to trespass, she said, her voice thin but steady. Just needed out of the wind. Her coat was thin, threadbare, her gloves frayed. Snow still clung to her boots. A leather valise lay near her feet, tied shut with a belt. I noticed the way she sat up, proud, even in her vulnerability, not begging, just explaining. What's your name? I demanded, the chill in my own voice surprising me. She hesitated, her gaze steady on mine. Clara May. You from town number came on the train. Got off 2 days ago. Been walking since. Where were you headed? She looked up at me then and something passed between us. Not recognition, not yet, but an alignment. Two people who had lived through hard things without asking anyone to fix them. I was looking for Jedediah Clark, she said. I stared the lantern flickering in my hand. For a moment I thought the wind had tricked my ears. You found him, I managed my voice, rough, disbelieving. She nodded again slowly as if that made perfect sense. I had a letter, she murmured. From him. From you. Said you needed someone kind. A knot tightened in my chest, cold and hard. Impossible. I never sent it. She smiled, a faint crooked thing. Maybe the Lord did. The words hung in the air heavy with a strange, undeniable truth. I had no answer. She looked away, brushing straw from her skirt. I'll move on at first light. Just needed a place warm enough to keep breathing. I watched her, how still she was, like someone used to being told no, someone who wouldn't fight it if it came again. No call to sleep out here, I said. The words surprising even me, a gruff offer. Come inside. There's stew and a fire. She glanced at me, startled for the first time. Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise. I don't want to trouble you. You're already here, I said, more gently than I intended. May as well come in out of the cold. She nodded slowly, rising without complaint. She gathered her bag and blanket. Boone stood too loyal to whoever needed warmth. We walked back through the snow in silence. The house was dark, save for the faint glow of embers behind the hearth. I gave her my chair by the fire, poured her a bowl of stew, and set it on the table without comment. She ate slowly, grateful. Not ravenous, but steady, like someone used to making food last. When she finished, I showed her to the spare room, the one with the rocking horse my brother had made for Alara. I hesitated in the doorway, a foolish thought. Should I explain it was my wife's room once? Did it matter? Clara May set her bag down, ran a hand along the quilt. Thank you, she said simply. I nodded. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the wind died down. The silence was still deep, but it wasn't hollow anymore. Somewhere down the hall, another soul was breathing. Not beside me, not yet, but near enough to matter. And for the first time in 2 winters, I, Jedediah Clark, did not dream of the grave. I dreamed of footsteps arriving instead of leaving. The morning came gray and quiet, snow still falling in soft, exhausted spirals. The land seemed caught between breaths. I rose before first light, driven by an urgency I didn't understand. The barn could wait, the fire was still warm, but idleness felt like a betrayal of something unnamed. I found Clara May already awake, sitting on the edge of the spare room bed, lacing up her boots. Her valise was beside her, again neatly buckled. I'll be on my way, she said, eyes downcast, a hint of resignation in her voice. Didn't mean to overstay. I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Where would you go? I pushed. She hesitated, then a shrug so slight it was almost imagined. There's always somewhere. I've made do before. I looked at her, then truly looked. The kind of looking a man does when he realizes someone else has learned how to carry her sorrow without letting it show. Her clothes were travel-worn but clean. Her hair was combed and pinned back tight, like she'd been raised to believe dignity started with neatness. There's coffee, I said after a moment, the offer feeling like a monumental effort. If you want it. That was how she came to stay. Just one more morning. Ilara emerged from her room, rubbing her eyes, blinking in confusion at the sight of Clara May in the kitchen. But the tension lasted only a minute. Clara May smiled, gentle and unassuming, and the girl offered a shy smile in return. When I set 3 plates instead of 2, no one remarked on it. The snow outside kept falling and the hours passed like a held breath. By noon, I found myself fixing the back gate with Clara May beside me, holding nails. She didn't speak unless asked, but moved with a quiet purpose. When Alara wandered into the yard with a rag doll dragging behind her, Clara May crouched down and mended a tear in the doll's arm with thread from her pocket. I watched the way she did it, fingers nimble, eyes tender. She didn't ask permission. She simply helped. Later in the soft lull of afternoon, Clara May stood at the edge of the porch watching the trees shift in the wind. Her face was unreadable, like snow covering the tracks of something once wild. I came up beside her, clearing my throat. How'd you come by that letter? She didn't look at me at first, just ran her gloved fingers along the porch railing. In a paper bundle, she said finally, her voice low. Woman at the agency in St. Louis handed it over. Said a man named Clark had written in but never heard back. Thought maybe the reply got lost. She gave it to me, said I seemed the sort who might suit a man like that. I felt the cold in my chest deepen, a moment of weakness exposed. I hadn't meant for it to go anywhere. That letter had been a whisper to the wind, never intended to find an ear. You thought to come all this way without hearing from me? I pressed a hint of accusation in my tone. Clara May nodded, once unflinching. Didn't have much left where I was. I didn't press, but my silence asked. I worked at a dry goods store, she said softly, her gaze fixed on the distant trees. Owner's wife took sick. He asked me to help. Then he asked for other things. Her voice didn't tremble, but it narrowed a dangerous edge. I said no. Lost the job. Room 2. Weren't many places left to be. I said nothing for a moment, the weight of her words settling. Then I gestured to the trees. This place isn't much either. She glanced sideways at me, a flicker of something in her eyes. It's honest. That's more than most. That night, Clara May helped with supper. She peeled potatoes, humming under her breath. Alara leaned against her, chattering in the simple, winding way of children. I watched from the table, hands idle. Something inside me shifted. Not a blaze, but the barest flicker of warmth, like kindling that hadn't caught yet. After they'd eaten and the dishes were set to dry, Clara May asked softly, "Would it be all right if I stayed through the storm?" I nodded, my voice rougher than I intended. "You can stay as long as you need." She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped just slightly. That was answer enough. In the days that followed, her presence settled like fresh snow, quiet, natural, covering the sharp edges without asking permission. I was a man who noticed details. I saw how Clara May always folded Alara's blankets with care, how she lit the lamp before dusk without being asked, how she never took the last piece of bread, even if it meant going without. She did not try to replace Esther. She moved through the house like someone who respected the ghosts, but refused to be one. Alara began calling her Miss Clara without prompting. Sometimes I caught the girl watching Clara May with a look that mixed curiosity and hope, like she was trying to remember something she never quite had. Laughter returned to her voice in small sudden bursts, like songbirds startled into flight. One morning as I returned from town with a sack of seed, I found Clara May reading aloud to Alara on the porch. Her voice was soft, lilting, the kind of voice made for stories. The girl was curled at her feet, eyes wide. Clara May looked up and met my gaze with a steadiness that didn't flinch. That night, after Alara had gone to sleep, Clara May lingered by the fire. The silence between us felt different now, not strained, but thick with things unsaid. I poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. "You were married before?" I asked, my voice a low query. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "He was a teacher. Said he wanted a simple life. Then said I was too plain. Said I'd aged too quick. Left before the bans were posted." My jaw clenched a familiar surge of protectiveness. "He was a fool," I growled, the words escaping before I could catch them. She gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe. Or maybe he just wanted something I never was." I looked into the fire, its glow warm on the stone hearth. "Truth is," I said, the words surprising us both, a raw honesty I hadn't intended. I never expected to feel much of anything again. I hadn't planned to say them, but they hung in the air now, smoke-thin and honest. Clara May didn't respond, but her fingers curled around the cup in her lap, holding it steady. That was enough. The days passed with quiet rhythm. A thaw came briefly, then more snow. Clara May stayed. No one spoke of it, but the house changed shape around her. The silence grew softer. Meals tasted fuller. The space beside the fire felt less empty. One night I passed by the door to Alara's room and paused. Inside, Clara May sat at the edge of the bed, brushing the girl's hair with gentle strokes. She was singing something low and sweet with the cadence of an old prayer. I leaned against the wall, eyes closed. The sound reached somewhere deep inside me, a forgotten chord vibrating to life. Later in the kitchen, Clara May folded laundry beside me. "I've stayed longer than I meant to," she said, her voice a quiet statement. "You're not in the way. I didn't come here to be kept. I came because I thought maybe I could be needed." I looked at her steady. The words formed on my tongue, powerful, undeniable. "You are." The words startled her. She blinked once, then nodded slow. That night I found the old letter again. I unfolded it, read it once more. The words felt like something someone else had written, a man drowning, begging the dark for a rope. But now, sitting by the fire, I wasn't drowning. I was waiting. Outside, the snow began again, light drifting soft as breath. Clara May sat across the room, darning Alara's stocking. Her face was calm, her presence anchoring the space around her. I watched her and thought maybe a man doesn't always get to choose how mercy arrives. Sometimes it walks through your storm with frostbitten fingers and a name that feels like a prayer. I didn't speak it aloud, not yet, but the words lived in the quiet between us, warm and waiting. The snow held to the land like it had made a promise it didn't intend to break. March crept in without mercy, and still the frost clung to fence rails, window panes, every wooden slat of the Clark homestead. The ground was white, encrusted, the trees bowed low and bare. But inside the house, the fire didn't flicker out as quickly anymore. It caught stronger, stayed longer. It warmed more than wood and air. It warmed something else. Something that hadn't known heat in a long, long time. Clara May had been there nearly 3 weeks. The days had settled into a rhythm that no one spoke of but all obeyed. She rose early, sometimes earlier than me, and kept to herself during the first hour of the morning, as if letting the house wake on its own. She made breakfast without asking what was needed. She swept the floors before anyone noticed dust. She folded my shirts with the same precision she used in sewing, pressing creases like care into the cut. She had no claim on the space she moved through, yet she moved through it like someone who belonged, and that unsettled me more than I could say. I watched her one evening from the woodshed, splitting logs to quiet the storm brewing in my mind. Through the window I could see her brushing Alara's hair, the child leaning into the touch, eyes half closed like a cat in sunlight. Clara May wasn't speaking, just humming again that same soft tune, with no words, like memory set to music. I felt it then, sharp and clean. Not longing, not yet, but the ache of something new stirring inside my chest, and with it the guilt. Not for wanting her. I hadn't gone that far, not yet. But for knowing that the presence of one woman was beginning to soften the shadow of another. Esther's face lived in my memory like winter lives in soil, quiet, buried, and necessary. She had been all warmth and firelight and laughter behind closed doors. Her death had hollowed me like a fallen tree. When she passed, I buried not just her body, but the part of myself that could dream. Now here was Clara May, neither demanding nor diminishing. She never tried to erase Esther's presence nor fill her shoes. She simply moved alongside the ghost, respecting its edges, sharing space and silence. And Alara, poor motherless girl that she was, had taken to Clara May like a flower, turning toward the only light it recognized. One night after supper, when the dishes had been done, and Alara was already dreaming beneath her patchwork quilt, Clara May lingered near the fire. I sat in my chair, boots off, Boone at my feet, cup of coffee cooling in my hand. I hadn't spoken much that day, caught in a mood I couldn't name. Clara May didn't ask about it. Instead, she pulled the sewing basket into her lap and began patching a tear in one of Alara's mittens. The lamplight caught her hair, made it shine like worn silk. I watched the way her fingers moved. Gentle, deliberate, unhurried. "You always liked that?" I asked, my voice low, almost a rumble. She glanced up. "Like what?" "Like I'm mending more than fabric." She smiled, faint. "Maybe I am." Silence passed between us. Not the cold kind, but the kind that asks to be kept. I shifted, stared at the flames. "I don't know what to do with you being here," I admitted, the words heavy. Florence didn't flinch. "You want me gone?" She challenged, her gaze sharp. "No," my voice came out rougher than I meant, a desperate denial. "That's the trouble." She said nothing, let the quiet stretch. I swallowed. "I don't want to dishonor what I had, but I can't pretend you being here hasn't mattered." Still, Clara May didn't rush her reply. She tied off the thread with a small knot, trimmed it clean, then looked up. "I never came to replace her," she said gently, her voice firm. "I came because I had nowhere left to go. I stayed because kindness like yours is rare." I turned toward her, my eyes tired, burdened. "I don't feel kind." "You are," she said, her voice unwavering. "You just forgot how to show it to yourself." It was the sort of truth that sounded simple but took years to earn. I didn't speak again that night, but when I passed her the sugar for her tea, I let my fingers graze hers just a little longer than necessary. She didn't pull away. The days grew longer by minutes. The sun hung later in the sky. The thaw had not come, not fully, but something in the air hinted at change. Then came the visit from Doc Thatcher. He arrived one afternoon, his buggy dusted with snow, eyes sharp beneath a brim full of ice. He brought medicine for Alara's cough and a bundle of letters from town. Clara May answered the door and offered him coffee before he could even stamp his boots clean. Inside, I greeted the man with a nod and little more. Thatcher had delivered Alara, had wept beside me when Esther passed, had not pried since. As Clara May stepped into the kitchen, Doc Thatcher leaned in voice low. "She's the one, isn't she? The one from the letter." I nodded once, a terse acknowledgement. "You marrying her," he pressed. My jaw clenched. "Haven't asked." "You planning to?" "I don't know," I growled, frustration simmering. Thatcher studied me, his gaze shrewd. "Well, if you don't, someone else will." He said it like a warning or a prophecy. That night, after the doctor had gone and Alara was asleep again, I found Clara May folding laundry in the parlor. I stood in the doorway, unsure. "Doc said I ought to marry you." Clara May didn't pause. "That's so. Said if I didn't, someone else would." She finished folding a shirt, placed it in the basket. "What do you say?" She finally looked at me, eyes steady, piercing. "I say I won't marry out of pity or obligation. I've had enough of that." I stepped closer, my voice low and tense. "It wouldn't be pity. But would it be love?" she asked, quiet but firm, her challenge echoing in the room. I hesitated. "I don't know what that feels like anymore." The admission was painful, tearing at my pride. "Then don't promise what you can't give." I didn't answer. I just turned and walked out into the yard where the snow was melting in places, leaving patches of brown earth behind. I chopped wood until the moon rose, until sweat ran down my back, and the ache in my shoulders felt cleaner than the ache in my chest. In the days that followed, Clara May grew quieter. Not cold, not distant, but withdrawn. Her bag was no longer in the corner of the spare room. It had moved closer to the door. I noticed. One afternoon, while I repaired the wheel on the wagon, Clara May came to me with a letter in her hand. She didn't speak at first, just waited until I met her eyes. "I wired my cousin in Missouri," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "She's offered me a place." I stood slowly, my blood turning to ice. "You leaving?" She nodded. "Soon." Ilara, overhearing from the porch, ran down the steps, eyes wide, a sob tearing from her throat. Why, Clara May knelt, touched the child's cheek. "Sometimes people don't stay, honey. Sometimes they were only meant to come through long enough to help." The girl burst into tears. I turned away, my jaw tight, a familiar emptiness beginning to bloom in my chest, a desperate fear. That night, Clara May sat on the edge of the bed in the spare room, hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, but her posture said everything. She had hoped. She had waited. And now she was gathering the pieces of herself before anyone else could. I stood outside her door for a long time, listening to the silence within. I didn't know what words might change her mind, or if any should. But I knew this: if she left, something in me would collapse inward again, and I wasn't sure I'd come back from it this time. I didn't knock. I didn't go in. But I stayed there all the same until the fire in the hearth burned low. The next morning I rose before dawn, hitched the wagon and rode into town. The roads were still slick, the wind sharp, but I drove with a singular purpose: coat buttoned tight, hat pulled low. I went first to the mercantile, then the smithy, then finally to the small chapel at the far end of town. When I returned, my eyes were red from the wind, or maybe from something else. I found Clara May in the kitchen, coat on bag by the door. "You leaving now?" I asked, my voice raw with apprehension. She turned, her expression unreadable. "Figured it best." "I went to town," I said, setting a small, heavy box on the table. She didn't touch it, just looked at me. "I don't have a speech," I said, my voice thick with emotion, clumsy words tumbling out. "I'm not good with feelings. But I know this: you showed up when I didn't think anything good ever would again. You mended more than clothes. You mended this place. You mended me." She said nothing, tears trembling on her lashes, her gaze fixed on mine. "I don't want to ask you to stay because I'm lonely," I continued, the words pushing past the dam of my fear, a desperate plea. "I want to ask because I finally see what's been standing in front of me. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what we might have had if I'd spoken." She opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, plain but polished, glinting in the pale morning light. "You sure?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath, filled with a fragile hope. "I've never been more." She stood there a long time, then set her bag down gently on the floor. "I'm not perfect," she said, a faint tremor in her voice. "Neither am I. I scare easy. I'll wait. I need more than shelter, Jedediah. I'll give what I can. Every day." She stepped forward and placed her hand in mine. Outside, the wind shifted, not warmer yet, but different. Inside, the fire didn't just warm the room. It lit the corners of a new beginning. The stars were still awake when I stirred, long before the rooster crowed or the stove's fire began to hum. The world beyond the frost-laced window was a hush of midnight blue and silver. I lay still for a moment, listening. The weight beside me had not shifted. Clara May had not come back. Not yet. Her door had stayed closed since our conversation the evening before. I had offered my heart in the plain-spoken language I knew, and she had stayed. But silence had taken her hand afterward. Not rejection, not acceptance, just quiet. I rose slowly, each movement deliberate. Dressed in the dark boots, pulled on collar, turned up. The house was still. Ilara slept down the hall, her arm around the doll Clara May had stitched. The child had smiled in her sleep last night, soft and unguarded. I hadn't seen that in many long moons. Outside, the cold bit like a blade, but I welcomed it. It made the blood move. I saddled the mare and rode out while the dark still owned the land. My breath ghosted in the air as I made the ride into town, each hoofbeat a pulse against the snow-packed earth. It wasn't until the faintest brush of lavender touched the sky that I knocked on the parson's door. The Reverend blinked at me from the stoop, face pale from sleep. "I need a ceremony," I said simply, my voice unwavering. "Before the sun rises." The Reverend rubbed at his jaw, tried to read my face. "Anyone else know about this?" I shook my head. "Not yet." I paused. "Does she?" "She will." The Reverend studied me, then nodded. "Give me 5 minutes." By the time I returned home, the sky had shifted from night's velvet to morning's hush. The world was tinted in pale colors, all breath and waiting. I tethered the mare and stepped inside, the warmth of the house rising to meet me like a sigh. Clara May was in the kitchen, dressed, hair braided down her back. She turned at the sound of the door, her eyes searching mine. "You were gone." Her voice was laced with a quiet tension. I had something to tend. I waited, patient but alert. "I asked the Reverend to marry us," I said, my voice steady, no hint of the tremor in my chest. Clara May blinked, but she didn't draw back. Her hands folded at her waist. Now I nodded. Before the sun climbs too high. She looked down, took in the plain blue dress she wore, the apron still around her waist. I'm not ready for something like that, Jedediah. I haven't even... Her voice trailed off a hint of panic. It's not about readiness, I said softly, stepping closer, my voice a soothing balm. It's about truth, and this is mine. You've already stitched yourself into this home. You've already found a place in my daughter's heart. In mine too, if I'm honest. She swallowed, throat-tight, tears welling in her eyes. I know you're scared, I continued, my gaze holding hers firm and gentle. I am too, but I also know what it feels like to lose everything and still wake up needing something to hold on to. Something that stays. She looked away, her jaw trembling. It feels like I've had to beg to be wanted most of my life. I ain't asking you to beg, I said, my voice firm, now stepping closer still. I'm asking if you'll let yourself be chosen. The silence between us was heavy but not cold. Alara's soft footsteps sounded down the hall. She appeared in her nightdress, rubbing her eyes. Mama Clara May froze. Ilara didn't correct herself, didn't even seem to realize what she'd said. She simply reached out and took Clara May's hand. Clara May's breath caught, her eyes met mine, and something unspoken passed between us, something that neither winter nor time could erode. She nodded. I left the room only to fetch my late wife's shawl, thick wool and lace-edged, kept wrapped in cedar. I held it out quiet. Clara May took it reverently and wrapped it around her shoulders. No veil, no gown, but there was meaning in the warmth of something once sacred, repurposed with tenderness. Ilara wore her boots over wool stockings and rode between us on the mare. The three of us moved like shadows through the still sleeping town, our breath rising in the cold like smoke from prayer candles. The chapel stood small and waiting, its windows dark. The Reverend met us with a lantern and a tired but kind smile. No witnesses, no bells, just the creak of old pews and the hush of mourning. Clara May stood beside me in the tiny aisle, hands clasped, eyes lifted but unsure. The Reverend's words were few and full. There was no poetry, only truth. Do you come here by your own will? Yes. Do you promise to walk beside each other, not ahead, not behind? Yes. Do you vow to give not what is perfect, but what is real? I spoke only when needed, Clara May the same. But when I looked at her and said, I choose you because you saw me when I forgot I was worth seeing, her eyes filled, and she nodded through the tears. The Reverend gave a small blessing, and that was that. No ring, no bouquet, just three people walking out into the first gold light of day. The sky was lavender above us, the town still slept, and no one knew yet what had taken place. It belonged to us alone. In the wagon ride back, Alara fell asleep on Clara May's lap. Tiny hand curled in the folds of her shawl. I drove in silence, watching the woman beside me with new eyes. I had married her not because I needed help with Alara, nor because I feared being alone. I had married her because in her silence there was strength, and in her eyes there was a mirror, one that didn't judge my grief but honored it. The house met us with a quiet that felt different now. Not the hollow kind. The sacred kind. Inside, I hung up my coat and made a small breakfast. Clara May sat by the fire, hair unbraided, now Alara still curled against her like a limb she'd grown without realizing. When I brought her a cup of tea, she took it without a word, and our hands brushed. No spark, no jolt, just warmth. The day passed like a breath. No grand announcement, no sudden change, yet everything was different. That afternoon, I found her sitting on the porch shelling beans. She looked up as I approached. Was it foolish, she asked quietly, a lingering uncertainty, to marry before we knew what would come? I shook my head. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is believe in what's growing before you see the fruit. She smiled at that. A small one, but it stayed. That night, Clara May tucked Alara in and stayed beside her until the girl's breathing evened. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. She called you Mama. Clara May turned her eyes wide. I heard. How did it feel? Like something I don't deserve, she said. Her voice thick with emotion, but something I want to protect all the same. I stepped into the room, rested a hand on her back. We'll earn it. All of us. Later, when the lamps were low and the fire casting shadows across the walls, I poured 2 cups of tea and handed her one. She took it but didn't sip. I meant it, I said, my voice resolute, when I told you this place needed you. She nodded, her gaze steady. And I meant it when I stayed. We sat in silence after that, letting the fire speak. And in that silence, the snow outside finally stopped falling. The sky beyond the window cleared. Stars blinked down on us, ancient and indifferent, but inside, beneath those stars, a small home glowed with something gentle and just beginning. Neither of us knew what the days ahead would bring. But we knew this before the sun rose that day: we had chosen one another. Not with fireworks, not with declarations, with quiet, with steadiness. and with hope. Spring didn't announce itself in Willow Creek with any kind of ceremony. It just softened the mornings little by little. Snow retreated without apology. Ice melted off the eaves and dripped like small metronomes onto the porch rail. What had been brittle and white became slush, then soil, then the pale blush of budding green. The wind changed too. It lost its teeth, started to sing again. Inside the Clark house, the rhythm had grown gentle and sure. Clara May moved through the rooms like she'd always belonged there. Alara followed her like a shadow, asking endless questions and giving soft, solemn hugs when answers didn't come quickly enough. I mended fences and dug furrows into earth I hadn't believed in before. I came in at noon with dirt on my hands and something lighter in my chest. The silence that had once choked the place had become a balm full of comfort instead of absence. We were not loud with each other. There were no grand shows of affection, but every gesture meant something. I would reach for Clara May's shawl when the wind picked up. Clara May would lay my gloves by the stove, warming them before I returned. Ilara began to hum Clara May's lullabies, never asking whose they'd been first. Love had woven itself into our days, not like lightning, but like roots, slow, unseen, inevitable. Then came the man from the past. It was a Tuesday when he rode in the kind of gray-skied day that made the sun feel like a distant idea. His name was Elias Thorne, and he wore it like a brand. Tall, lean, dressed fine for frontier standards. His boots were polished as coat without wear. But his eyes moved like someone who didn't trust the road beneath him. He showed up at the Mercantile, first asking quiet questions. Then he showed up at the Clark place. Clara May was on the porch stringing beans with Alara when she looked up and saw him. Her face didn't twist in surprise or fear, just tightened slightly like a door pulled gently closed. I stepped out of the barn and watched the man dismount. Elias, Clara May said, her voice flat, devoid of any warmth. I wondered if you were still breathing. He gave her a small, almost arrogant smile. Didn't expect to find you all the way out here. I didn't leave a map. His gaze flicked to me, then back to her. I came to talk. I have no interest in that, Elias. Her voice was ice. He glanced at the child sitting wide-eyed beside Clara May. You have a daughter now. She's mine, Clara May, said her voice sharper now, a blade of fierce protection. She's been mine since the day she wrapped her arms around my neck and didn't ask what I'd done wrong to be alone. Ilara stood and reached for Clara May's hand. Clara May squeezed at her eyes, never leaving Elias. I made mistakes, he said after a long moment, a false note in his voice. You were right to be angry, but time changes a man. It didn't change your timing, she said, her voice dripping with an old cold bitterness. You always come when I'm just about all right again. Elias looked at the house, at the fields, at me. You married him. Yes, she answered, unflinching. He paused, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name in his eyes. You deserve better. I have better. Her voice was unwavering, absolute. I hadn't spoken yet, but I stepped forward now, slow and solid. Not confrontational, not afraid. Just there. You've said what you came to say, I told the man, my voice low but firm, a statement of ownership. Elias narrowed his eyes. She deserves a man with fire in his blood, not one who builds walls around grief. I didn't flinch. She doesn't need fire. She needs steadiness and peace. Clara May spoke then, soft but sure, a quiet hammer blow. Elias, you didn't come to win me back. You came to see if I was still breakable. I'm not. He looked at her like he almost didn't recognize her. And maybe he didn't. Maybe the Clara May he had known was a girl who bent toward whatever kindness wouldn't disappear. But the woman before him now didn't bend. She stood rooted. He mounted his horse and left without another word. When the dust settled, I turned to Clara May. You all right? My hand reached for hers. She nodded slow. Yes, more than I expected to be. I looked down at Alara, who clutched Clara May's skirt with big, worried eyes. Clara May bent and scooped the child into her arms. Mama's not going anywhere, she whispered, and the words wrapped around my heart, tightening a promise for us all. That night, after the supper plates had been cleaned and Alara tucked beneath her patchwork quilt, Clara May stood at the window watching the moon rise. The room behind her was dim lit only by the hearth's glow. I entered quietly, my steps familiar now, my presence a comfort rather than a question. He always had a way of finding cracks, she said, without turning a ghost of a memory in her voice. I joined her, looked out at the moonlit yard. He won't find any now. I used to think I needed someone to chase me, Clara May said, her voice a distant echo, to make me feel worth the effort. My brow furrowed. But you, she continued, turning to face me, her eyes shimmering in the dim light. You walk beside me, even when I say nothing, even when I fall quiet. That's love, isn't it? Not the rush, but the return. I nodded, the truth settling deep in my bones. I never knew how to speak it, but I think I live it now. She stepped forward, rested a hand against my chest, and I leaned into her touch, closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the walls I'd built inside myself felt like they were dissolving stone by painful stone. I was a broken man, I whispered, the confession tearing from me. You are grieving, she replied, her voice soft, firm. And grief doesn't make you less, it makes you deeper. I opened my eyes, looked into hers. You believe that I live it. In the quiet that followed, something unspoken passed between us, something vast and tender. We kissed, not like strangers fumbling toward passion, but like two people who had already built a life with their hands and were now learning to rest in the safety of it. Spring came hard and full after that. Rain turned the fields rich. Birds returned to the trees. Ilara grew like the wildflowers, small and bright and stubborn. She called Clara May Mama without thinking now. I watched them from the porch some days, my heart swelling in ways I no longer feared. The townsfolk began to notice the change. Doc Thatcher would tip his hat and mutter something about miracles. Mrs. Tate, once all suspicion, now brought preserves and spoke with gentle awe. Even the mailman lingered longer at the gate, asking after Ilara's favorite stories. But none of that mattered more than the way Clara May laughed, now freely from the belly, or the way I reached for her hand without checking first, or how on rainy mornings we would sit together at the table with coffee and speak about nothing and everything. Then one night the storm came, a true spring tempest. Lightning like split bones across the sky, thunder that shook the glass. Ilara whimpered in her sleep and Clara May rose to soothe her. I lit the oil lamp, checked the windows, and found Clara May already standing by the girl's bedside, one hand stroking her brow, the other steady on her shoulder. I watched them for a long time. The storm howled, but inside it was calm. When Clara May joined me again, she curled beside me on the worn settee, her head resting on my shoulder. You know, she murmured, her voice, a soft hum against my ear. I think I was waiting my whole life to stop waiting. I brushed a thumb over her knuckles, the soft skin warm beneath mine. You were always meant to be found. The storm passed before dawn. The fields shimmered with new water. The sky cracked open into golden blue. That morning, Clara May walked outside and stood barefoot in the mud, eyes closed, face lifted to the nascent sun. Ilara ran around her in circles, chasing butterflies that hadn't been there yesterday. I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, smiling like a man who finally believed in the future. As Clara May turned toward me, muddy dress clinging to her ankles, I opened my arms. She went to me without hesitation, and in that moment the world was not loud or fast. It was soft and full. A quiet kind of love, steady as a heartbeat, earned, not given, built, not begged for. All the years we had wandered her through rejection, me, through grief, we had found something better than rescue. We had found each other. And the sun rose on a day that would never again belong to silence. The story of Jedediah Clark and Clara May reminds us that the deepest wounds are often healed, not through grand gestures, but through patience, kindness, and quiet, steady love. It shows how loss can cause a heart to close itself off, yet the timely arrival of someone willing to share in that sorrow can open the door to hope again. For those in the later seasons of life, this message feels especially profound. No matter how much we have lost, it is still possible to find comfort and meaning in genuine human connection. Love doesn't always have to be loud or passionate. Sometimes it is simply the presence of someone who walks with us through the long winter of our days, reminding us that our hearts still have room to be warmed. This story speaks to the priceless gifts of patience, compassion, and the courage to open up once more, and reminds us it is never too late to find a family, a true home, and a love that heals.